Good morning. All right. Hello, everyone. Dr. Bobby Whitaker here from Murfreesboro Chiropractic, and I am reading to you Ogmandino's The Greatest Miracle in the World. And I love, love, love this book. Have you read it? Probably not, or you wouldn't be here, but it is a great one because it reminds us all that we are God's greatest miracle. And this body that we live in is created to heal from the inside out. It's all about putting more good in and detoxing the bad, right? Whether that's mental, physical, or spiritual. Get rid of the bad, put in more of the good. Flood your mind, body, and spirit with the good, right? So anyway, we're going to start into chapter 2, and we might even go on to chapter 3, depending on how long this takes me. Okay, so if you have got the book, then follow along, and if not, then just listen and join in. I hope you enjoy it. All right, chapter 2. I didn't see him again until late spring. It had been one of those Fridays that never seems to end. Problems concerning routine matters involved with publishing a monthly magazine had increased in velocity and number during the day, and by the time all the brush fires were extinguished, I was alone and beat, both physically and mentally. I sat at my desk listening to the gentle tick of my desk clock and dreading that long drive home in traffic. Even at this hour, Eden's Expressway would be jammed. Once more, those nagging and recurring questions popped into my mind. Why are you working so dang hard? Did you think it would be easier once you got to be number one? Why don't you resign? Your book royalties are already 4 times larger than your salary. What are you trying to prove now that the magazine is a success? Why don't you go somewhere else where it's peaceful and quiet and write all those books you've still got burning inside of you? Habit and my own pride seemed to be the only logical answer to these questions. I had taken Success Unlimited magazine from a monthly circulation of only 4,000 with 3 employees to its present 200,000 and a staff of 34. Yet I knew that there was still 120 million potential subscribers in our country, and it was a challenge going after them. Then I tried to remember who had written, "The beginning of pride is in heaven. The continuance of pride is on earth. The end of pride is in hell." No luck, bad memory. I tossed my reading glasses into my attaché case, grabbed my jacket and top coat, turned off the lights, and locked the office. Except for the street lamp on the corner of Broadway and Devon, it was dark as I walked slowly past the window of Root Photographers, across the alley mouth behind our building, under the overhead train bridge, and through the small opening into the parking lot with its garish and cracked orange and yellow sign flashing, "Park yourself, only 50 cents." I was halfway across the shadowy lot, now nearly filled with neighborhood cars, before I saw him. His tall silhouette moved silently from behind a parked panel truck, and even in the blackness, I recognized him. Before I saw his dog trailing behind, I turned and walked toward him. "Good evening," that basso profundo voice replied. "I bid you greetings on this most beautiful of evenings, sir." "I never had the opportunity to thank you for helping me in the snow that day." "It was nothing," he said. "We're all here to help one another." I reached down to pat the basset, who had been nuzzling at my pant leg. Then I extended my hand toward the old man. "My name is Mandino, Og Mandino." His giant fingers wrapped themselves around mine. "I'm honored to meet you, Mr. Mandino. My name is Simon Potter, and this 4-legged ally of mine is called Lazarus." "Lazarus?" "Yes, he sleeps so much of the time that I never know whether he's dead or alive." I laughed. "You will forgive me, Mr. Mandino, but your first name, it is very distinctive. Og. Og. How do you spell it?" "O-G. Well, that was your given name?" I chuckled. "No, my real name is Augustine. Back in high school, I wrote a column for our school paper, and one month I signed my piece Og, A-U-G. After I'd written it, I decided to be different and spell it phonetically, O-G. It stuck." "That is a rare name. There cannot be that many Ogs in the world. I've been told I've been told that one is too many." "Do you still write?" "Yes." "What sort of writing?" "Books, articles." "Your books have been published?" "Yes, 5 of them." "That's marvelous. Who Who would expect to meet an author here among the empty wine bottles? I'm afraid that's where you're liable to meet a lot of authors, Simon. Yes, sad but true. I too write a little, but only to pass the time and to satisfy myself. The old man moved closer as if to study my face. You look tired, Mr. Mendino, or rather, I think I should call you Mr. Ogg. I am tired. Long day, long week. You have far to journey after before you reach home? Oh, about 26 miles. Simon Potter turned and pointed his long arm toward the drab four-story brown brick apartment house facing the parking lot. I live there on the second floor. Before you begin your long drive, come have a glass of sherry with me. It will relax you. I began to shake my head, but as in the snow that day, I found myself wanting to obey him. I unlocked my car door, tossed in a top coat and case, closed and locked the door, and fell into step behind Lazarus. We passed through the unswept lobby, past the pock-marked brass mailboxes with their yellowed plastic name holders, and climbed the worn and pitted concrete stairway. Simon removed a key from his pocket, turning it in the lock of a pine-stained door on which the number 21 had been stenciled in red, pushed it open, and made a sweeping gesture for me to enter. He flipped the light switch and said, "Forgive my humble retreat. I live alone, except for Lazarus, and housework was never one of my better skills." His apologies were unnecessary. The tiny living room was immaculate. From the lint-free braided oval rug to the cobwebless ceiling, almost immediately I spotted the books, hundreds of them spilling from the two large bookcases and stacked up in neat piles as tall as their owner. I looked at Simon quizzically. He shrugged his shoulder and warmed the room with his smile. What else can an old man do but read and think? Please make yourself comfortable and I shall pour our sherry. When Simon went off to the kitchen, I walked over to his books and I began reading all the titles, hoping they would tell me something about this fascinating giant. I cocked my head and ran my eyes along some of the book spines. Wildurant's Caesar and Christ, Gibron's The Prophet, Plutarch's Lives of Great Men, Fulton's Physiology of the Nervous System, Goldstein's The Organism, Eiseley's The Unexpected Universe, Cervantes' Don Quixote, Aristotle's works, Franklin's autobiography, Menninger's The Human Mind, Kempe's The Imitation of Christ, the Talmud, several Bibles. My host walked toward me, holding out my glass of wine. I took it and placed it gently against his glass, the rims touched with a soft, lovely note in that silent room. Simon spoke. To our friendship, may it be long and filled with good. Amen, I replied. He pointed his glass towards the books. What do you think of my library? It's a great collection. I wish I had them. You have wide interests. Not really. They're an accumulation from many years of pleasant hours in secondhand bookstores. Still, they have a common theme which makes each volume very special. Special? Yes, each in its own way deals with and explains some aspect of the greatest miracle in the world. And so I call them Hand of God books. I love that. Hand of God? It's difficult for me to put into words, he said, yet I'm positive that certain pieces of music, certain works of art, and certain books and plays were created not by the composer, artist, author, or playwright, but by God, and those whom we've acknowledged as the creators of these works were only the instruments deployed or employed by God to communicate with us. What's the matter, Mr. Ogg? Apparently, I had jumped at his words. Only 2 weeks earlier in New York City, Barry Farber, a popular radio host, had used those exact words, the hand of God, when praising my book to his audience during my appearance on his program. You mean you believe that God still communicates with us as he did during the days of the ancient Jewish prophets? I am positive for thousands of years, this world witnessed a countless parade of prophets pronouncing and exclaiming the will of God. Elijah, Amos, Moses, Ezekiel, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Samuel, and all the other marvelous messengers until Jesus and Paul. And then, no more? I can't believe that. No matter how many of his prophets were ridiculed, chastised, tortured, and even murdered, I cannot conceive that God finally gave up on us and turned his back on our needs, causing some of us to finally assume that he must be dead since we hadn't heard from him in such a long time. Instead, I truly believe that he is sent to every generation, special people, talented people, brilliant people, all bearing the same message in one form or another, that every human is capable of performing the greatest miracle in the world. And it is man's most grievous fault that he has not comprehended this message, blinded as he is by the trivia of each succeeding civilization. What's this greatest miracle in the world that we can all perform? First, Mr. Ogg, can you define a miracle for me? I think so. It's something that happens contrary to the laws of nature or science, a temporary suspension of one of these laws? That is very concise and accurate, Mr. Og. Now tell me, do you believe that you're capable of performing miracles, of suspending any laws of nature or science? I laughed nervously and shook my head. The old man rose, picked up a small glass paperweight from the coffee table, and held it across to me. If I release this weight, it will fall to the floor. Is that not true? I nodded. What law decrees that it will fall to the floor? The law of gravity. Exactly. Then, without warning, he let the paperweight fall from his hands. Instinctively, I reached for it and caught it before it hit the floor. Simon folded his hands and looked down at me with a self-satisfied grin. Do you realize what you've just done, Mr. Og? I caught your paperweight. More than that, your actions temporarily suspended the law of gravity. By any definition of a miracle, you have just performed one. Now, what would you judge has been the greatest miracle ever performed on this earth? I thought for several minutes. Probably those cases where the dead have supposedly come back to life. I agree, as would a consensus of world opinion, I'm sure. But how does all this connect to those books you've got piled up? Certainly they don't contain any secret methods on how to come back from the dead. Ah, but they do. Mr. Og. Most humans in varying degrees are already dead. In one way or another, they have lost their dreams, their ambitions, their desire for a better life. They've surrendered their fight for self-esteem, and they have compromised their great potential. They settled for a life of mediocrity, days of despair, and nights of tears. They are no more than living deaths confined to cemeteries of their choice. Yet they need not remain in that state. They can be resurrected from their sorry condition. They can each perform the greatest miracle in the world. They can each come back from the dead. And in those books are the simple secrets, techniques, and methods which they can still apply to their own lives to become anything they wish to be and to attain all the true riches of life. I didn't know what to say or how to respond. I sat staring at him until he broke the silence. Do you accept the possibility of individuals performing such a miracle with their own life, Mr. Og? Yes, I do. Do you ever write about such miracles in your books? Sometimes. I would like to read what you've written. I'll bring you a copy of my first book, he said. I said, there are miracles in it? Yes, many. When you wrote it, did you feel the hand of God upon you? I don't know, Simon. I don't think so. Perhaps I should be able to tell you after I have read it, Mr. Og. We sat after that exchange in a stillness interrupted only by an occasional rumble from a truck or bus bouncing along the ruts of Devon Avenue. I sipped the sherry and felt more relaxed and at peace with the world than I had in many, many months. Finally, I placed my glass on the small polished end table next to my chair and found myself staring at two small photographs, each enclosed in a small bronze frame. One was a lovely brunette woman, and the other of a blonde male child in military uniform. I glanced at Simon, and he sensed my silent question. My wife, my son. I nodded. His voice, now so soft that I could scarcely hear him, seemed to float across the room. Float across the small room to me. Both are dead. I closed my eyes and nodded again. His next words were barely a whisper. Dachau, 1939. When I opened my eyes, the old man had his head bowed, and his two giant hands were clenched together tightly against his forehead. Then, as if embarrassed that he had momentarily exposed his grief to a stranger, he sat up and forced a smile. I changed the subject. What do you do, Simon? Do you have a job? The old man hesitated for several moments. Then he smiled again, spread his hands in a self-effacing gesture, and said, I'm a rag picker, Mr. Og. I thought rag pickers disappeared with the soup kitchens and hunger marches of the early 1930s. Simon reached across, placed his hand on my shoulder, and squeezed it gently. By definition, Mr. Og, a rag picker is one who picks up rags and other waste materials from the streets and junk heaps to earn a livelihood. I'd imagine that sort of rag picker has almost disappeared from the American scene during these years of nearly full employment, but we could see them again if conditions change. I doubt it. Our crime rate seems to be telling us that we've discovered faster and easier ways of laying our hands on a buck, like mugging, armed robbery, and burglary. I'm afraid that what you say is true, Mr. Og. Still, in this day of soaring prices for paper and metals, I'd imagine that a rag picker or junk man could do quite well for himself. However, I'm not that sort of rag picker. I see more valuable materials than old newspapers and aluminum beer cans. I search out waste materials of the humankind, people who have been discarded by others, or even themselves. People who still have great potential, but have lost their self-esteem and their desire for a better life. When I find them, I try to change their lives for the better, give them a new sense of hope and direction, and help them return from their living death, which to me is the greatest miracle in the world. And of course, the wisdom I have received from my Hand of God books has helped me immensely in my, what shall I call it, profession. See this wooden cross that I often wear? It was carved by a young man who once was a shipping clerk. I ran into him one night on Wilson Avenue, or rather, I'd say he ran into me. He was intoxicated. I brought him here. After several pots of black coffee, a cold shower, and some food, we talked. He was truly a lost soul, nearly crushed by his inability to properly support his wife and two young children. He had been working at two jobs, more than 17 hours a day, for almost 3 years, and he had reached the breaking point. He'd begun to hide in the bottle when I found him, trying not to face his living death and a conscience that was telling him that he didn't deserve his wonderful young family. I managed to convince him that his situation was common and far from hopeless, and he began to visit me nearly every day before he went to his job. Before he went to his night job. Together we explored and discussed many of the ancient and modern secrets of happiness and success. I imagine I touched on every wise man from Solomon to Emerson to Gibran, and he listened carefully. What happened to him? When he had $1,000 saved, he quit both jobs, packed his family in their old Plymouth, and headed for Arizona. Now they live in a tiny now they have a tiny roadside stand just outside of Scottsdale, and he's beginning to command fairly large prices for his wood carvings. Now and then he writes, always thanking me for giving him the courage he needed to change his life. This cross was one of his first carvings. He's now a happy and fulfilled man, not any richer, mind you, just happier. You see, Mr. Rogg, much of us build prisons for ourselves, and after we occupy them for a period of time, we become accustomed to the walls and accept the false premise that we are incarcerated for life. As soon as that belief takes hold in us, we abandon hope of ever doing more with our lives and of ever giving our dreams a chance to be fulfilled. We become puppets and begin to suffer living deaths. It may be praiseworthy and noble to sacrifice your life to a cause or a business or the happiness of others, but if you're miserable and unfulfilled in that lifestyle and know it, then to remain in it is a hypocrisy, a lie, and a rejection of the faith placed in you by your Creator. Simon, forgive me, but does it ever occur to you that perhaps you should not interfere in the lives of people, or that you have no right to do so? After all, you're not out there. After all, they're not out there looking for you. You must find them and then convince them that they can have a new life if they're willing to try. Aren't you trying to play God? The old man's face softened in a look of sympathy and compassion for my apparent lack of perception and understanding. Yet his reply was brief and forgiving. Mr. Rogg, I'm not playing God. What you will learn sooner or later is that God very often plays man. God will do nothing without man, and whenever he works a miracle, it is always done through man. He rose as if to bring our visit to an abrupt end, a technique I've used very frequently at the office if it was in my best interest to terminate an interview. I shook his hand as I stepped into the hallway. Thanks for your hospitality and the sherry. It was my pleasure, Mr. Rogg, and please bring me a copy of your book when you have a chance. During that long drive home, one question continued to intrude itself into my thoughts. If that wise old rag picker specialized in rescuing human refuse, why was he wasting his time on me, an affluent and successful company president, in the 50% tax bracket, who had just written a national bestseller? Good question, huh? Isn't that neat? Okay, so that was chapter 2. I think we'll end there. I might jump back on and do another one, but I wanted to have these done chapter by chapter. So thank you for jumping on, and maybe we'll get some more people jumping on the next live. I think I'm going to jump right back into it here in just a second. So if you have any comments to talk about this book, please share below, or maybe you've read the book and have some, have a short review. Please share, what is your thoughts about this rag picker so far, Mr. Simon Potter? And what are your thoughts about the main character, Og Mandino, of this book? How neat. I love this book. All right. Have a great day. Talk to you soon. Blessings.